foiling left and right. And then you've got me, Baron Voltage, a.k.a. Christopher Ryan, a.k.a. Small Medium at Large, a.k.a. Guy that loves to throw a.k.a. at the end of every single sentence. And tonight, we're actually joined by a guest from halfway around the world. Dear gods. Oh, man. Would you be so kind as to shout into the ether, kind sir, and give us a lovely introduction?
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Meeting Me. My name is Guy, and I'm from How to Be a Great GM, the YouTube channel on role-playing and storytelling and just having fun.
Fantastic, yes. You see, now that is the kind of voice you want to hear at the other end of a cardboard screen, giving a great freaking campaign, to say the least. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, it's without a doubt. Before we start to get into it, and we hit off on our main sponsor for our first sponsor for the evening, just want to thank you folks for tuning in. Without a doubt, we have hit 510 subscribers, I believe, on our YouTube channel. Probably get a secondary confirmation on that. And once again, to be reminded of the misery that I'm going to be getting put through because we hit 500, I'm going to be consuming some hot wings.
511.
511. You see, this is because you people love to watch me suffer as well as love to watch the show. So we thank you all, one and singular. I'm going to find where you all live, I swear. But for tonight, our first sponsor of the evening is, of course, Audible. Now, I'm going to tell you this. Kevin has his certain opinion and viewpoint on Audible, and I certainly share it. It is one of the greatest service out there for those of us that, can't have a physical book on hand and, you're kind of on the go, you're consistently moving, you need to have audio. And you know what? Audible definitely tops it all of their services in regards to it. Varying different types of subject matter, reference, fiction, nonfiction, self-help, you name it. They've got the collective works of some of the authors that we've actually had on here. Dacre Stoker in particular, the original trilogy of vampire novels. Even Brian's books are on there.
Yep.
And got the entire compendium of Anne Rice on there as well. And the other wonderful woman, you know who I'm talking about? Thank you, because my memory is complete and total shite.
I can't remember what's the name of the author, but I'm thinking they're thinking of the Kitty Norville books.
That would be the Kitty Norville books.
Carrie Vaughn.
Carrie Vaughn.
Carrie
I'm
Vaughn,
so sorry, Carrie. Please don't kill me. But yes,
that's my job to run them to death.
Yes, exactly. But it's vast, and you cannot beat it anywhere. Now, if you want to actually check it out, they've got a wonderful deal where if you subscribe, you get your first book, and your first book's free. You can't beat that. And even if you don't like it after a month trial, you get to keep the book. You got to try it out. Who can go wrong?
If you use Audible/Paranormal E, you help out the show also, though, as well as getting the deal.
Yes, so please do that. The link will be down in the description below, so do check it out. And without a doubt, you're not going to be sorry you did. So, Guy, it is great to have you on the show. Where are you calling from?
Currently, I am in Tokyo, Japan.
Oh,
lucky!
It's the mecca of two of the people at this table right now.
Well, particularly right now, since a certain game has finally been released because Square Enix likes to...
Nobody cares about Kingdom Hearts.
Nobody. Ever. No. No,
obviously I'm kidding, but
yes.
Kingdom Hearts is not the be-all, end-all when it comes to that.
It's not the be-all, end-all, but it did take how many years for it to come out, and they finally released it, so everybody's losing their minds.
Right now I'm purposely trying to see where the bolt of lightning is going to come from the Square Enix gods for saying that it's not the greatest game ever.
They're only allowed to kill me if they send Sephiroth or something better.
They'll send Kefka.
You know what? There's probably kids watching.
Exactly.
Anyway.
But, being a game master as you are, dungeon master as it may be, I'm certain that, you've had to really come up with some extremely elaborate and creative ways to really throw your players off. Which, let's face it, I am an agent of chaos, so I'd love to hear some of the more interesting and sinister ways you've done so.
Oh, I think the greatest achievement could be perhaps to have, excuse me, to have a player who you give them the choice of being good or evil.
Oh.
And then you give them the choice of being evil, but it's probably or possibly good, because then there's a little internal moral voice that screams that they still shouldn't do it because it's still evil. But there's a very big part of them that screams that they should do it because they could justify it. And those kinds of moral dilemmas, I think, are ones where you quite literally will watch a player, and I must confess, I have done this a few times. You watch them writhe as they try and work out if they, as a human, are good or slightly evil. And
I swear, I think you and I were separated at birth.
right.
Aren't we all slightly evil?
Yeah, speak for thine own selves. I'm only slightly good.
Well, yeah,
Can confirm.
true.
I have to say that type of moral dichotomy is beautiful. I
Yes.
love it very much. Now, considering we're a paranormal channel, as nature would dictate, I'm sure you've had in your travels various types of influences that kind of gave you an idea of the creatures and environments of which to throw your players, as well as the dilemmas. You got any in particular that stick out in mind?
Well, I come from South Africa, and the South African police force actually has a division specifically for magic and the supernatural
Not surprised.
to this
Nice.
day. So I come from a country that's steeped in mysticism and in the occult.
Oh, do share.
And
Oh, yeah.
so, yeah, I suppose you could say it's always been part of my experience, always part of my world. I have had, I should say, sadly, a stepbrother who was actually saved from a witch doctor who was going to use him for occult purposes.
Oh my.
By my father. So I've always grown up with these sort of things, and yeah, I think the influence definitely one only needs to look in your own backyard to find these things. But I think the benefit of South Africa is that you have the Western approach to spirituality and to the paranormal, and then you add in the African approach in terms of tribalism and ancestry and the like. And so you get this incredible space where lots of things are happening. And I mean, I've had a few experiences myself.
You're going to have to
you
tell us
kind of go,
that.
well, what is this? What is this really? And you draw on that to make your games that much more interesting, I think.
Wow. Well, I mean, you mentioned you had some experiences. I'm really, now you got me extremely intrigued. I was already like stoked to have you on because you were as creative as you are, and then you peppered it in with the evil and immediately began to make me salivate. Now you're telling me you've had some experiences. Feed me the meal here. Come on,
it
you're doing
does.
great.
Before he
does
eats
fit
himself,
the-
please.
Yeah, it does fit the theme of the show.
Fantastic.
Now, you see, this is all part of the evilness of being a
yes.
true storyteller.
Yes, you hooked
Is
us
that
in, now
I've
reel
offered
us.
it, now I'm going to deny it.
Oh no! Wait,
Wah,
so
wah.
where's my 20-sided die here? I need to roll for initiative. Oh wait, no, don't. I can't roll. If I'm like a nat 0, that like never freaking works.
What the hell are you talking about? There's no 0 on a nat 20.
Have you not seen me roll? My dice would
You roll
find
better
a way.
than I do. Jerk.
The last
Dice
few
will
times
find a
we've
way. I
run
like
a
that.
game.
I'm not on.
Yeah, so, you know, there have been some experiences where one just can't take things into account and one can't answer them. My childhood, we grew up on a farm out in what was considered and still is considered rural South Africa. So sort of isolated with let me just do the conversion to miles quickly, probably about 10, 15, 20 miles to the next farmhouse type of thing. And the vehicle that our parents owned, my parents owned, was stolen.
Oh
And for months, the police couldn't find it. And my father was a big believer in the witch doctor, which in South Africa is called a sangoma.
Oh, Sangoma.
And so he went to the sangoma, who threw the bones and who interpreted the signs and said, no, this is where your vehicle is. And it was about 180 miles away, the location that he indicated. So my father said, right, he took the police with him and went to that location, and sure as eggs, that's where the vehicle was.
Wow.
So, that for me was sort of the very first memory that I have of that sort of thing coming into play. And that was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. So,
Wow.
yeah, it really sort of started then. And when you walk down the streets of Johannesburg, there's a market just for practitioners. So it contains dried herbs and the various bits and pieces that these practicing witch doctors and things need, because it's all been regulated so that there isn't an environmental issue that comes about as a result of the witch doctors practicing their beliefs.
South Africa has their own
so you
Diagon
kind of see it every day.
Why are you surprised?
Yeah, not surprised, just awesome.
I'm already looking to get a passport now. Awesome. They have Diagon Alley. How can I not want to go?
Right.
You know?
No, it's interesting. The culture. One of the biggest creatures, and there've been a couple of films that have been made in South Africa about this. Is called a tokolosh, and a tokolosh is a vile little homunculus, really. That's created by an evil witch doctor, usually on request by somebody else, to then go and traumatize and potentially kill the particular target.
Sounds like my ex-wife.
So this is, this is sort of something that you do
I'm
on a
glad
Saturday
you're in full
afternoon,
agreement
really.
here. Yeah.
The tradition is that if you raise your bed to the height of about 20 centimeters off the ground, you are protected. And so you won't find a household that doesn't have a bed at least 20 centimeters off the ground. Now, to put it in context, traditionally within Africa, the sleeping arrangement was usually just on a grass mat on the floor. So to transition to raised beds and things was quite a process, and I've seen that here in Japan as well, where the Japanese, they have a very specific approach to indoor furniture and the like, which in my opinion is basically make the fat man sit on the floor.
I think that's more dependent where you stay.
That does lead to some very interesting moments, but yeah. So it's an interesting space. Let's put it that way.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, I'm certain, varying cultures left and right, they've got all
Apparently,
their
we got a
presentations.
question from YouTube chat from
Ooh.
Smug Duck.
Okay.
Isn't there spirit dance festivals that happen all around Africa?
You'd have to be more specific on that one. I mean, there are many dances, and they're something that the Westerners never fully appreciate, and I think this is the saddest part, is that Africa, and I use broad strokes here, so it really is generalizing, but the African cultures, because there are so many of them, traditionally engage in dance and in song for almost anything. So they will sing when they are happy, they'll sing when they are sad, they'll sing when they are melancholy, they'll sing when they're just sitting together and they have nothing to do, and they have the most amazing ability to harmonize regardless of whether you even know the song or it's absolutely amazing. So there are festivals of all kinds,
So they're Klingons.
to celebrate everything.
Yeah.
Not quite.
They're Klingons, but
Not-
they're harmonizing Klingons. I love it.
Right. Yeah, look, and I will never forget. I used to do a television show on music, and we would have these massive festivals where you've got sort of 20,000 people in a stadium, and the stadium starts singing a fairly intricate song where you have sopranos and bass and baritone and the like, and members of the audience just naturally know where they fit within that choral space.
Wow.
And just start singing it. So it's I haven't experienced it anywhere else in the world in terms of yes, you get sort of the sports songs and that kind of thing, but they're usually pretty bad.
Yeah, they're
in
usually
Africa,
kept
it
simple.
sounds like it's been rehearsed for 20 months and choreographed.
Amazing.
That's
I mean, yeah, most of the stadium music that you hear one way or the other, it's meant to be simple because let's face it, you step into a stadium, you're about 3 or 4 cups in, and you're kind of like seeing triple what's on the field. So being able to actually coordinate a vocal arrangement is going to be a bit of a challenge, or hilarious.
Which is a shame because the few baseball games I've been to where I had to go and sell concessions, I've noticed that there's a lot of dead time during these games where they'll just try and get the crowd to cheer because they're just sitting there bored.
Oh, yes.
Right. Well,
you
that
know.
does not happen in Africa.
No, and
Usually you have to ask the audience to stop performing so
Wow.
that the performers can start.
you want to know what the thing is? It's an impromptu concert that comes with your game. Enjoy it while the ball is not in play.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, it's your own version of commercials in halftime. Only it's halftime at the end of every single play. Red card. Next thing you know, break out in song. It's great. It's the red card song. Yellow card. It's the yellow card song. It's great. Oh, we got an injury on the field. Let's sing a song about the injury. It's great.
Sing a song about the injury. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's great. Now, I understand there, in many cultures, there's a tie-in between music and this, I guess you could call it the spiritual realm.
It's essentially a type of communing that can be done, even in like Northern Europe and whatnot. It was a way to do so for years. Only some areas of the Mediterranean, even, it's practically a universal thing. However, how they went about such performances, because it wasn't just singing, it was just music in general. Because in some areas, it may have been dangerous to sing because it would, scare away the local game that people were out hunting. So it was also a more seasonal appropriateness as well to be taken into account.
And I can speak to experience in regards to the Ifa and Yoruba and Yoruba cultures in particular, that a lot of their singing and chanting in regards to a lot of their communing with the upper and lower deities is meant mostly to get their attention, show any kind of deference one way or the other, and invite them in. So I'm sure that there's some variance to the cultures one way or the other, be it Japanese or South African, as you may have encountered.
Sure,
where
absolutely.
there is a similar
The
ilk.
Japanese culture, from what I have experienced, and I haven't experienced a lot of it, is in true Japanese style, silent, except for when it's not meant to be silent. But if you go to a Japanese shrine, and they're beautiful, absolutely beautiful, it's a very quiet place.
That's a bucket list.
And you don't wail your prayers or your songs. In the Shinto shrines, you politely clap, sometimes 3, sometimes 8 times, and that's the full extent of your sort of deference and yes, appeal to the forces beyond. In Africa, there are definitely the community, although they love singing and it's part of the culture. When it comes to things like working with the Sangoma, that is an incredibly closed space. It's an incredibly private space, and there's an organization for the witch doctors, which banned them from committing their thoughts, committing their history to paper. It was a thing. Traditionally, African cultures don't have a lot of writing as part of their culture. It was brought in mainly by Europeans and things.
Right.
But the Sangomas were particularly forbidden to commit the creation myths and the history of the supernatural to paper, because they felt that it would somehow trap and reveal the true nature, which I thought was quite interesting in terms of how that mirrored medieval Europe, you cannot commit our religion to paper nests in Latin because we don't want it to be accessible to the public.
Yes, because let's face it, if you want somebody to not understand what the hell you're saying, you say it in Latin.
Yeah.
Well,
Right,
it's also similar to
right.
the whole concept, even later on, where certain groups of people would get freaked out if you took their picture
Oh,
because
yes.
it was like you were taking their soul.
Yeah.
Correct.
So we also got Eric Ham Izel. Something that Guy might have some insight to. I'm sure you have covered many types of vampires, but the concept seems to exist in so many different cultures. Do you happen to know of anyone that exists in South Africa?
Oh,
There's a couple
my
different
area.
types.
Yeah, now we got something. Brian is.
Yeah,
And
that's
considering
an
my
interesting
main thing is
question.
usually around Egypt, so it's like, yeah.
Yes, Egypt definitely. You know, it's a funny thing when one looks at Africa, you sort of think of Egypt as not necessarily being part of Africa. Northern Sahara territories, Algiers, Egypt, and the like. I think often people kind of think, oh well, that's there, and then you have Africa, where you think about jungles and savanna and elephants and lions and things. At least certainly that's I think a big
Lions and tigers and bears.
conception
Oh
to
my!
that.
Yeah. I've studied
Tiger in Africa.
Yeah, I've studied the vampires in various parts of the world, and I know of a couple in the African continent, but I don't know of any specifically in South Africa.
Yeah, I'm trying to think myself. There isn't really that sense. And when you look at where vampires came from, generally speaking, in Western culture anyway, they're a fairly recent phenomenon from that perspective. So, yeah.
It depends on how you define vampire. Because
Right.
near as we can tell, it may have started with the Greeks in this idea that the dead need your blood in order to communicate.
Okay, yes. So it does depend on your definition of
Yeah,
of
the
vampire,
Babylonians
correct.
had Lilith and
There were a lot of different
Syrians.
renditions in that. I mean, even there's a type of spirit that is similar to. It's almost like a vampire and an incubus had a baby, and it's literally called an alp, just like the Appalachians.
Oh god, the Alp.
Yeah, the alp, and I've had one attached to me. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. I was thankfully able to get it off because they're also considered trickster spirits as well. But they have a very vampiric bent to them as well. But a lot of people are like,
Right.
"Wait, what's that?" And I'm like, going, "How do you not know?"
Yeah, but from what I understand, most of the vampires that I've seen from Africa seem to be of the witch variety.
Yeah, the Sangoma and there was a variant of Sangoma, and the name completely eludes me at the moment.
You're forgiven.
Thank you. From that sort of broader interpretation, like I said, I had a half brother who was found by my father when he was about 6 or 7 months old, maybe a little bit older than that. But he had been designated as a orphan, and so he had been given over to the Sangomas, who were then going to harvest his organs for use in their rituals and in their rites.
Oh my.
So there is a certain amount of consumption of body parts, or at least of the organs and the like, which you could make a case for that if you look at it from that perspective. Generally, the blood sacrifices were usually animals and things like that. So
It's amazing.
Similar to fortune telling in
yeah.
some parts for scrying.
oh, absolutely, and that was predominantly it was either medicinal or usually for telling the future or finding things. Also, something to bear in mind is that we didn't have massive cities and development like that. There were places like the great ruins of Zimbabwe, which were possibly larger cities, but predominantly you were dealing with groups of people maybe at the size of 200, maybe 300 people per village. And very seldom would those individuals get together. It was only once, in South Africa anyway, it was only once the Zulu nation was forced to exist that we started to get larger populations happening. And really only once the West had come in and started to allow for bigger settlements to happen, because it's not really an agrarian society. There is certainly a small amount of agriculture, but predominantly it's hunter-gatherer. So when you have a smaller group of individuals, usually your shaman, your sangoma, whatever you want to call them, their function is the protection of that space and ensuring good things happen to that group of people, right? So a good hunt or protection from wildlife. And in Africa, you certainly need protection from wildlife. So
Yeah, it's the second Australia.
yes, yeah. Well, we South Africa has a very, very long-standing rivalry with Australia. It's a very friendly rivalry.
It's the same like latitude or something. The Balti is, I swear. Once you get to that particular latitude of the world, everything's gonna kill you.
Yes, correct. Australia, they do take it to extremes, but that's only because they want to be better than South Africa. So their wildlife has to be more vicious.
Wow,
because the house is bigger. You see.
This guy.
It's a competition.
I like
The worst
him.
competition ever.
Believe it or not, sir, there is a very similar bent in regards to. I'm not sure if you've ever been to the States. I'm always going to presume that somebody from across the pond does not.
Right.
The U.S. is divided up into 50 individual states, but the thing is that every single one of those states have their own particular rivals and rivalries. But the one universal thing amongst all 50, with the exception of one, so it'd be all 49, is they all hate Jersey, which is the state that we're in.
Yes.
Well, as Kevin Smith pointed out, we are the most hellbound place on earth.
Yes, we are. It's where the weak get eaten, the strong survive, and when you cross the toll bridge, you got to pay your toll to get out. We are like a prison. The thing is that unless you pay your bail, you ain't getting out.
There are ways.
Wow.
There are ways out.
There are ways out, but then again, there were ways out of Alcatraz, too.
And my friend showed me this great parody of it, the overplayed song "Let It Go," where it's like it takes place in Jersey, and when you get to climax of the song, it's like, that's it, I'm going inside. Oh, my friend just threw a snowball at me. Now it's on. It's like, yeah, that's a Jersey thing.
Jersey,
Yeah.
if anything, is one of the few states that has a rivalry with every single one of them, in particular New York. The only thing is that Jersey is very much like South Africa in this regard. Everything that New York likes to claim actually belongs to Jersey. Liberty Island, where the Statue of Liberty is, that's Jersey state property.
Staten Island is not ours, though.
Staten Island is not ours, but then again, Staten Island is New York state property. That's why we've never claimed it. Ellis Island, on the other hand, is ours, although New York likes to claim it. The one that created their theme song, New York, New York, sung by Frank Sinatra. By the way, Frank
Hoboken.
Sinatra is from Hoboken, which is Jersey. You know,
Granted, Jersey with you cross the bridge in New York.
yeah,
It's
well,
still Jersey.
it's still Jersey. By the way,
Seriously?
75% of Hollywood comes from this state, for goodness sakes. You know?
We got Bruce Willis, Kevin Smith. What are some of the other ones?
Peter
Springsteen.
Dinklage.
Peter Dinklage.
The Dinklage, yes.
Oh, additionally,
Wow.
any other cartoon you've ever seen is either someplace general or it's in New York. There was a cartoon that was actually taking place in New Jersey. It had mechs. It had time travel. And they
Vegas
canceled it.
XLR.
Yes,
I
thank
love
you.
that show.
Yeah, it only had one season. They canceled it early. The only other cartoon that they canceled earlier than that happened to take place in New Jersey was Clerks.
Damn right.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if Clerks aired before it got canceled.
It aired for 2 episodes.
Yes.
The said previous cartoon with the mechs was on for a full season.
I thought it was 2.
Anyway, we're approaching
off
the
topic.
halfway mark of the show. I'm going to give y'all the number so that you can call in and join all the fun. You can
Yes.
reach us over at 609-807-2492. Just in case you didn't catch it the first time around, it is 609-807-2492. We have our wonderful guest here. And Guy is, without a doubt, so far the most interesting person I've had the pleasure to talk to all month. That's saying something. considering how awesome the people I hang around with already
achievement
is.
I will cling to.
You know,
There you go.
The thing is the people that I hang out with are already awesome. So the fact that you're actually talking to us, man, I bow down.
So all of us are gamers.
Yes, to some degree, some bent, some sort of variant.
So
I grew up with it.
Yeah.
So.
So give us a little taste of like your channel, like how to be a great GM. What are some tips
Yes.
and whatnot that you've given out?
Well, I suppose, and I think this is relevant to all kinds of gaming. The biggest focus of my channel is on delivering upon expectation. And I think that's a fundamental, as an author, I think you'll appreciate this as well. But
Yeah.
if your audience expects X and you give them Y and you don't acknowledge X, they are going to kind of come away either loving it or feeling as if they've been cheated. And I think in gaming, whether it's PC gaming or console gaming or role-playing or anything along those lines, there is an expectation and you have to try and meet that. So it's about trying to understand and control the expectations within, in my case, the role-playing environment. How do we work with that? So if you're running a horror game, for example, what are the expectations that go with that? If you're running sci-fi, what are the expectations that go with that? Because once you've got an understanding of expectations, I think it makes life a lot easier.
Yes. I can certainly, understand that. We're actually, the 5 of us are all running a particular game of Scion that Kevin was trying to push. And some of the interesting little twists, turns, spirals, and reversals we've had to deal with have been quite unique. And believe it or not, it's like my second foray into actual tabletop gaming, which is rather unique. So hearing it from a secondary perspective is unbelievably delightful.
We just got a question from YouTube that I think if Kevin, if you're still listening in and you're planning on calling in, maybe you should call in and help fill out this one, which is a universal question. How would any of you use the concept of a demonic possession in a campaign in an understandable, defeatable, and realistic way?
Oh.
I think that depends more on the culture that you're trying to do when it comes to the actual demonic entity that you are incorporating into the game.
And how?
So that's a multifaceted question.
We actually had Kevin do that for us in the one game.
The
Doom.
Yes.
it was for Dread, yeah.
Dread, that's it.
And how would you do it, Guy?
How would I include demonic possession so that it's defeatable? I think, and I know this sounds awfully boring if you're not a game master, but you have to work out how they're going to defeat the creature before you give them the creature. So, if it is a demonic presence, what is the mechanic that's going to let them get out, and let them sort of, let the players figure out how to defeat this creature? Because sometimes you can get to a point where the players are like, well, I don't really know what to do. And I always find that in those kinds of cases, if you're running a rule system that has a particular mechanic for it, like a waving, just cast expel demon, that takes away from the terror of it, I think.
I see.
So
Looks like
I
we
would
got
do
a
that, and I
comment.
would use modern day technology too. I'm afraid I used to be a big proponent against using technology in games and things.
Oh.
Hello?
Hello.
Are we there?
Hello?
Do we still have Guy?
I'm still here.
Oh, okay, cool.
Who have
Is
we
this,
got calling
Kevin?
in?
What do you think?
It's me, Boneheads.
Yeah,
Oh, dear God. it's
Excuse you.
Kevin.
Check yourself.
that's what I thought.
Check yourself.
I thought I felt a disturbance in the force.
Hello, guys.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. I'm getting over being sick. For anyone who hasn't figured it out, this is Kevin, the missing host.
No, we didn't notice
I
at
hope
all.
you're wearing a face mask because I have just got over my flu and I would hate to get it again.
Yeah, I don't blame
Through
you.
the phone.
No.
Thank you for
nothing.
joining us. You have been even more interesting than I thought you would be, and that's saying something.
Well, yes, I'm not sure how to take that.
It's good. It's a compliment of sorts.
Believe
No,
me,
no,
Kevin's
I
trying.
thought you'd be an interesting guest, but I've been listening in, and everything you said about African culture has been really interesting to me.
Yeah.
I'm very glad of that. I'm glad of that.
Yes. You see, I told you we'd actually do a good job without you, Kev.
Oh no, you guys have done a great job.
Are you sure?
I'm not here because you haven't been doing your job well. I'm here because I want a chance to talk to the guests.
There you go. Well, thankfully, the thing is that Jersey germs don't have a way of traveling across seas from a distance like that, so...
Couple miles by microphone is another matter,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But all the way across the ocean would be a good trick.
It's from Jersey. We'll make it happen.
like
So I
Godzilla is
wanted
our
to
problem now.
ask you guys, although I'll be happy to weigh in on the possession question that I just sent through. So, Guy, what's your favorite of the horror RPGs?
Oh, that's an interesting one. And I hate to say this, but I'm not a fan of RPGs that are boxed into a space like this is a horror RPG. So Call of Cthulhu, for example, I love Call of Cthulhu as a role-playing system. What I don't like is the idea that Call of Cthulhu is a horror RPG, because again, if we go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of expectations, when I tell my players I want to run a Call of Cthulhu game, they expect tentacles, demonic possession, darkness, terror, horror, etc. And to a degree, that disenfranchises you as the game master to be able to do it, because if you go into a horror film expecting a horror, you're going to get it. If you don't get it, you're going to feel very sort of betrayed, or you're going to say, well, that's not even a horror film, that was basically just a drama. If you're doing role playing and it's a long it's a long campaign, it's a long session, I personally am of the opinion that you cannot sustain horror over an extended period of time. You have to break away. You have to have moments of humor. You have to have light, happy spaces in order to offset the horror. So when you have a role-playing system, right? When you have a horror system when you have a system that sets itself up as being just horror, and yet you now want to give your players a humorous moment, or you want to give them anything that is not blood from the walls and demonic possession, there's a certain resistance to that. And I think horror can be presented regardless of your RPG system. I should also sort of preface that I'm a system agnostic, as people like to say. I don't have a particular system that I prefer because I like to be able to manipulate, just to keep in the theme of tonight of manipulating audiences, but I like to manipulate my players into the system, into the settings that I like. So a little bit of horror today, right? You are going to be terrified because next week you're going to be laughing your ass off, and then the week after is going to be more horror.
Actually, I have a question.
This guy's my twin.
I actually have a question because for the longest time, because simply schedules, I only had essentially one person that was willing to play with me as far as like role playing and whatnot, and we sort of had this back and forth system where freeform or within like a certain like show verse or something like that, we would roll percentage dice, which what would you say would be your not preferred but your most adaptable freeform role-playing style, like as the storyteller or as a player?
In terms of system, what sort of systems are out there that allow for that, or?
Correct. So is it something that you homebrewed, or would it be something that was essentially established?
That's
like
interesting.
Within the coast,
well, I am writing my own system at the moment based on all of the systems that I played before, and on the thinking of the channel in terms of a role-playing system where you have more chance to succeed than fail. But in terms of something that is freeform like that, there are a few that come to mind, and there's one from Finland, which I know I keep punting on my YouTube channel, but I really was blown away by it because it doesn't use dice, and that's a system called Stalker, which is based on the Russian novels of the same name. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the authors' names because I would do injustice, and I'm flying over Russia in a couple of weeks' time, so I don't want to step
Don't want
the odds
bad
against
juju,
myself.
yeah.
Fair enough.
Stalker is a game system whereby you describe what your character is going to be doing, and you try to really tell the GM, the game master, what your character does to mitigate and to achieve their goal. And every additional thing that you add gives you, if you like, a +1 to the outcome. And before you start, the GM will say, okay, in order to achieve this outcome, you need a 4. The GM will decide how difficult it is. If you describe enough activities and enough preparation, and you can justify from your character background that you would have a little bit more knowledge on the particular activity, the GM is just assigning you, oh, that gives you a +1, that gives you a +1, that gives you a +1, until eventually you overcome the preset value. So it completely removes the dice. There's a lot more to it than just that, but I think that is a really good way of making a lot more narrative-based game where it is that sort of free-form space. Then
Do you know if that's available in English?
It is available in English. I have a copy here right in front of me.
I'm going to have to check that out.
You know, Stalker,
That sounds
what's
very similar to
interesting
what we
about
do.
Stalker is that if you go to burgergames.com, there's a free punt for them, burgergames.com. I believe you can pick up a copy. What was interesting about Stalker was I met the author in Finland, and he was saying how this is actually a horror game. So the setting is interesting. Asteroids collide with the Earth, and there are these zones which are created, and what happens inside the zone is very different to real world. And you get everything that comes with this zone of stuff, weird creatures, experiences, psychotic events, etc. So it's a really moody space.
Wow.
I believe the book that they wrote was called Roadside Picnic, which came out in the 1970s from Russia. It was written by a pair of Russian brothers.
Sounds like an old 70s horror film.
It was turned into a film, from what I understand, called Stalker.
Oh, well, there you go.
So
This is something we should look into.
Yeah.
Like
Very much so.
It reminds me a little of I don't know if you're familiar, Guy, with the Amber system, the diceless role playing.
I haven't heard of Amber. I will now add it to my list.
It's based on a series of fantasy novels by Roger Zelazny.
Right.
It's very very interesting. It's a fun system, but it doesn't use dice. It's purely narrative.
I love narrative stuff.
Fantastic.
It's very
I'll
Fantastic.
say another really interesting system that if you're not familiar with, Guy, you might want to check out is called the Annalise.
Annalise.
Yes. It's a system, ostensibly it's a horror game, and it's about vampires. But it's a vampire game about everything other than the vampire itself.
Right.
What I find so interesting in the concept is there's no single game master. It's like some of the newer independents, you share the job between the players. But instead, and you do use dice, but instead of dice simply being success or failure, it's you come up with 2 outcomes to every scene. You know, one generally that will be good for your character, one that won't. But you have to set them up in such a way that both outcomes might happen, or only one, or neither could happen.
Wow. Interesting. I like that. It really causes one to have to think outside the box, which I think is pretty awesome.
I also like what they do
Yeah.
with Sorcerer.
Oh, yes.
Because Sorcerer is really fun because it sort of uses dice, but it's not mandatory. The way they literally explain it is, we're giving you the skeleton. Whatever you want to do, however you want to role play with it, go for it. So if you just, kind of want to use dice or point system for creating the character, fine. But if you don't want to use it afterwards, that's cool too. It's very, you can customize. So they essentially give you the foundation for you to build your roleplay house, as it were.
Yeah, and at least it's similar. I mean, the idea is, it's definitely a game about dealing with something predatory, because it's this idea of your characters all have some, two of your traits, because you don't have stats per se, but you have a dark secret and you have something that makes you vulnerable. And the idea is that this vampire, this predatory creature, is drawn to that vulnerability, but you can use your secret both in game mechanics and in story-wise. You use the secret as a weapon against it. So you don't it's not necessarily a literal vampire. There's various setups in the game. Like one is, okay, it's a superhero universe where the Justice League has just attended the funeral of their biggest villain, but now he seems to be back.
Interesting.
Yes. Well, Guy, I actually I thought about this a few moments ago when we were talking about evil and delightful evil, as it were.
Oh Lord!
Especially the deviousness of a DM and game master as a whole. Has there ever been a particular situation where you gained incredible satisfaction at the destruction of your players and watched in their delight? Can you give us an example of something you've done where you just sat back?
Now you are revealing my true evil nature.
Yes. Where you just had to sit back and you swear you had like a cup of brandy and a cigar, just like, go ahead and squirm, my pretties. I guarantee every single game master I've ever come across has always told me that there have been moments like this where they sat back and just watched the other players squirm. Please tell me you've got one.
Oh, I have many of those.
I am all ears. Please
I'm
feed
just
me.
wondering if I should tell you the one that brought me the most satisfaction recently, because it really was evil.
Yes.
But this is bordering on the. But that's actually evil, as opposed to good evil.
You're
Good
talking.
evil being the enjoyment of causing others to have enjoyment by being used in such a way.
Yes, please.
I was running a game. You can actually go and watch this evilness. I was running an online game for one of the shows that I do, and the NPCs within the game, the non-player characters that don't normally, they're run by the game master, not by the players, had built up a very good relationship over the past year and a half of playing with the players, and there was a catastrophic revelation in the game which the players, I think, were so excited by and so filled with glee and with jubilation over having had this major turn and twist in their story, that their characters were a little bit gung-ho with revealing this world-shattering truth. So, two of the NPC characters, I wanted to drive home to the players that there was a certain seriousness to this whole nature. So, I had two of the NPCs commit suicide as a result of losing all hope and faith in the future world. And when they were discovered, one of the players burst into tears in real life because it was so emotionally tragic.
Wow.
And that for me, I know that that's not one of those ha-ha laugh moments, but as a storyteller, to have your story elicit such an emotion in another human being is one of those things where I think there is a certain amount of evil where you do sit back and, okay, for me it's not a cigar and whiskey, it's a cup of coffee and probably some kind of donut, but similar idea.
Hey.
Where you have this emotional connection, and I think that for me is where I derive most of my satisfaction. But there have obviously been other times where players have been absolutely terrified, or they in the actual room where something creepy is happening. I've had players get up from the table and say, okay, something just touched the back of my neck, and there was nothing there. It was that they had been so in scene that they had felt something. It was probably just
It's
wind.
believe it or not. I mean, the thing is, there's a phenomenon like that occurs within trance and self-hypnosis, where a person becomes so focused on something that the brain immediately starts to go into a suggestive state, where you, as the game master, eventually ends up manipulating the subconscious into causing tactile sensation.
Okay, folks, before you get too much further, I do want to say my stomach's acting up a little again, so I'm going to have to bow out at this
No
point.
problem.
Guys,
Okay.
Thanks for
thank
calling
you
in,
again
Kev.
for joining us.
Feel better,
You've been
Kevin.
you're a great guest.
My absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me in the first place.
We'd love to have you back at some point.
Yes.
Yeah, I was
definitely.
going
Especially when
to
I'm
say,
feeling better
if we
and
want to
can
do
be
this
there.
again, and I think we'd all be down for it.
Oh, yeah.
But good night.
Lovely.
But before we get into anything else, real quick, Eric Ham Ezel, question for anyone really. You spoke about the Mandela effect a couple of episodes ago. How would you use the Mandela effect to create a compelling and playable campaign?
The Mandela effect?
Yeah.
Wow.
Ooh, that is
That'd be interesting.
So,
Wait,
point of
what?
clarification for anybody who doesn't know, the Mandela effect is basically when public memory fails. You know, is it Luke, I am your father, or is it no, I am your father? Which, if you watch the movie, one makes sense and one doesn't.
Yes. It was so named the Mandela effect, and ironically, you might have a little bit of knowledge on this guy, considering he was your president for a while. There was a lot of conjecture, apparently, as to whether or not Nelson Mandela had died many years ago, whether or not he just died, whether or not he's still alive, or whether or not he's still alive and in prison, or if he's just alive and free. For some reason, various parts of the world can't necessarily come to a consensus on this.
Yeah, look, I mean, Nelson Mandela was an amazing man. I had the privilege of interviewing him once for television. But,
Nice.
yeah, well, with regards to his death, I remember he in South Africa was always seen as the leader of salvation in terms of bringing about democracy within the country, and rightly so. He really did go through a lot of trials and tribulations to get to where to get South Africa to where it was. And I think, you know, the political shift, as always happens, is one uses one's icons as often and as best you can when it suits you politically. So when he was in hospital on his final days, within the whole country was holding its breath. Wow. Because he was seen as being the icon, and what happens when the icon dies.
Right.
And so there was lots of uncertainty. There were so many rumors coming out. Oh, he has died, but they're just pretending that he didn't die because they're waiting for the right political moment to say that he's dead. And you know, so absolutely, there was a lot of misgivings and misconceptions about that. I personally, I am satisfied. Well, I don't know what to say, satisfied, but I don't think that he's still alive anymore.
Oh, no.
He would be very, very, very frail and very old.
Well, I mean,
mostly in the early 2000s, late 90s, that
I
people
see.
were having
Gotcha.
this great
Yeah.
debate.
Okay. Yes. No, he was still active. I did a lot of work. He had a children's foundation, the Nelson Mandela Children's Foundation. I used to do a lot of work with them. And his public appearances certainly were cut back.
Right.
Because of his frailty and the like.
Oh no, it's not a question as to whether or not he still exists. The thing is it's a particular phenomenon within public memory, where something that is generally considered fact amongst the consensus of all people. For instance, one of the more notable ones was the Berenstain Bears. Most people take a look at the name and title of that particular children's book series and television series, and they thought that it was spelled Berenstain, Stein. Yet, if you actually take a look at the books, it's Stain.
Berenstain.
Which really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Exactly. Again, like I said, all of public memory remembers EIN, yet for some strange reason, it never was. So you begin to wonder, was it always like that, or did we trip into a parallel universe? That's the phenomena.
I honestly think in that particular instance, it's that weird English rule when it comes
EIN
to
being
I
consistent.
before E is
Yeah.
that C that,
But-
which only applies to like maybe 40 words if you're lucky,
Yeah, and
The so-called rule.
yeah, and
with all the exceptions.
and it was almost seen as a little bit of a supernatural effect within society where
Yeah,
we all
X-Files.
remember something completely and totally different. as
X-Files
opposed
did
to
a
fact.
wonderful episode on it.
That's right, they
And-
did actually.
And it was particularly named after Nelson Mandela because of the conjecture in particular with that, where there
That's
are people that
fantastic. I didn't know that.
Yes.
To be honest with you,
Yes.
which I think is well, I don't know whether that's sad or a good thing that
Well,
as a South African we didn't know that existed. But
it's a confusing
it's a
bit.
wonderful tool in terms of controlling expectation.
Yes.
Within storytelling, is if you have a world that believes X and then it's actually slightly not. I think that's great. I also think that that's a function of our sorry, let me reorder these words here.
It's all right.
It's a collective function of what we have been collectively educated versus something that, as was said, is something that slightly bucks that trend. So because it's too difficult for us to sort of remember the oddity, we just add it or change it in our psyche. Terry Pratchett used to, he was a British author.
Yes.
Love that
He
man.
used to maintain that we can't see death or any of the other deities for that matter, because when we see it, our brains find it so discordant with what we expect to see that they just erase it so that we don't sort of turn into a blob of glue. It could be
I
something
love
like
it.
that too. It's like,
Yes. I mean, that's without a doubt, it's a perfect descriptor, and I can certainly see how you would be able to use that in a particular gaming scenario, to say the least. Wow. I mean, there's variance in different techniques in story and narrative. There's always going to be a particular, I guess you could call it, flavor. And you, sir, are like the crème brûlée. I dig this very much, monsieur.
But yeah,
Hey,
now
you're wrong.
we're getting close to the end. This might be a good time for you to plug any sort of things you have coming up or your channels and whatnot.
Yes, make yourself even more famous, if that's even possible.
well, okay, so some exciting things coming up. If you have any listeners who are in London, in the UK, I don't know if you do or not.
I think we have
For
a
them it's
decent-
like 3 a.m. But if you do have any in the UK, we're hosting a convention that is How to Be a Great GM and World Anvil, a world aggregator. We're hosting a convention on the 2nd of March in Croydon, which is South London. So they can find that on our Facebook page, How to Be a Great GM. Otherwise, the show continues. We do a live show now on Fridays, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, on Twitch and on YouTube. That's Twitch is twitch.tv/greatgm. And on YouTube, it's just look for How to Be a Great GM. We pop up.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that's the immediate stuff. I'll be at Gen Con this year in the States.
Oh,
so
nice.
That's going to be exciting. I'm actually going over to the States early. I'll arrive in early June or mid-June, attending some medieval fairs and stuff, and then going through to Indianapolis. Yeah.
Which makes me
So
just
it's
really hope that my convention can finalize everything to get you. I do Anime Next every year, and I'm currently in talks with trying to get you to come
Right.
over.
Yes, I would love to do that. Absolutely. So if that happens, I'll be in the States even earlier because that's early June.
I would highly recommend, if you do go to any medieval fairs, go to the one that's in New York in Tuxedo in August.
It's very nice.
Yes.
That one and PA Ren Fair is.
The park is also.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, those two are particularly good.
Yes.
I
fantastic.
practically grew up at the PA one. So.
And I'm plugging the New York one because I'm also an actor with that one as well.
Is it the New York one, or is it really just a Jersey one that New Yorkers have taken over?
Good.
Oh, I love this guy. This guy over here. You know what? The thing is that at one point, if you ever start voicing an NPC, you can actually throw me in as one. Just remember to have the thick Jersey accent.
There you go. There you go. I'm going to try and master that.
Oh, all you gotta do is just basically sound like somebody ran over your cat and you wanted to stomp him into the ground. Forget about it. Just throw that at the end of every single sentence and you're good.
Wait, Brian, move your head.
Well,
I love that. Absolutely love that.
yes. Well, folks, we're just about wrapping up here. I want to thank our very wonderful guest for calling in from clear across the other side of the world. Guy, you have been, without a doubt, one of the most enjoyable guests that we've had here on the show, and that is even including myself, if I can even call myself pleasant.
Well, it's been my absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much.
We're pleased to have you.
Now, I'm going to give a shout out to our second sponsor, and then we'll be wrapping up entirely. Is there something else?
I'd like to quickly go down the schedule of events for the next couple of shows.
Naturally.
Oh, okay.
Next week is Valentine's Day, so we're going to be doing some sort of Valentine's Day special related to that.
Fantastic.
Hint, this is the only time we've ever done a show essentially practically on the actual thing. It's always been the week before we did the thing. I don't know why. Blame Kevin.
Yes.
Yeah. And we are going to have Linkara on the 21st, and particularly, I don't know about the rest of you, but particularly me and Kevin are really excited about that. We're really big fans. And then on the 28th, we have booked Matthew J. Rainwater of Trailer Park Warlock, which I describe as a webcomic of if Harry Dresden were a wizard living in a trailer park.
Fantastic.
All right, and after that, it's whatever we come up with.
Yes.
Namingly me eating hot wings while Kevin tries to have a philosophical debate with me. You can imagine how nuts that would be, Guy.
Yeah,
Yes.
a lot of sticky fingers.
Oh, yes, without a doubt. As we are coming up with time for the second sponsor, I just want to tell you all about NordVPN. Now, I can tell you there are certain parts of the world where you can't access certain parts of the internet, and many of us don't like anybody knowing where we're going in that lovely little World Wide Web. Well, if you don't want anybody to know about it, check out NordVPN. They got military-grade encryption. They don't save any of your browser data, and they make sure that nobody else can either. They have very affordable plans and rates for you to be able to check out. You can mask your IP, no problem, no issue, can't be touched, can't be beat. I would highly suggest you check out the link down below in our description to try it out. Seriously, it's without doubt one of the best services out there. Do it seriously. And frankly, I don't want anybody knowing where I've been on the internet. I don't think you do either.
And how can you beat military-grade encryption?
Without a doubt. So, I think that wraps up this evening's show. I'm going to go down the line specifically and save my jittery ass for last. Well, to that side there, how you going to say good evening? You ladies first. To our producer.
I'm Beth. Live long and prosper, everybody.
Brian McKinley saying, keep your fangs sharp.
Meow, 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 meow.
Thank you,
Amisha,
Amisha
everybody.
Campbell.
Meow mix.
And this is Baron Voltage for Paranormal Encyclopedia saying, avoid lightning rods, and for God's sakes, if you come into Jersey, stay here. Otherwise, get the hell out. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe if you liked what you saw, or if anything, you want to know what? Raise a bit of a stink and have me run the show a little bit longer just to make you guys laugh a little bit more. It's a Baron takeover.
It's a Baron coup!
Good night, folks, and have a great and pleasant evening.
Night.